Chris is someone on which a legend has been poured. I am well paid to know that people on which legends have been poured work quite a great deal at it. The one thing that we all have is an extraordinary, somewhat desperate normality, so that ultimately legend comes to who wants to create the legend. But I also think that his entire cinema is about respecting that legend, that if you or I knew really who Chris was, in some ways, it's not simply that his intimacy would be violated, is that its cinema would be violated, is that its essential mystery. So I think his real name is Fantomas or Judex, or more Fantomas than Judex, in fact. You know, that he is, Chris in some ways disappear. I mean, Chris Marker disappears in his creation. That is that machine, is this thing. And that's why at the end of it, he sends you pictures of cats, because the cat is alone, because the cat dies alone, because the cat goes as he or she wants to go, and because the cat always has a grin. And the only way I'm going to come alive out of this thing is by respecting the grin, because if I didn't, I'd be betraying Chris. Godard has a conflictual relationship to narrative and to literature in general, and a kind of seismograph position. You know, he picks up the vibes and the tremors. I think that Chris is more literary. And more profoundly essayistic. I mean, Jean-Luc's dream is to be Montaigne in some ways. That's what he said. And I think Chris is more naturally that. I mean, you know, there's a kind of very stunning fluidity between medium that he has, between not only between medium but also between existential positions. I mean, I don't think that Chris necessarily saw himself necessary as a filmmaker, or that there was something too provincial for him. That is, you know, this kind of you know, it's like Montaigne, the inventor of the essay genre. I mean, you know, his ass on a horse, as he said himself all the time. And that's the sense that that you have with Chris. I mean, it's this kind of traveler, but crossing also genres and practices. This is a film that tells you the antes are up. Yeah, I mean, and it's a kind of a gesture that, you know, and on top of that, it's not about the antes are up, and it's good for you because you're going to learn something. You know, I mean, the antes are up, and it's a wonderful tale that is being told to you, and that tale, in some ways, you've always you've heard it in some fashion. I mean, you know the genre, you know the parameters, and you know, among other things, because you know the parameters, you know the genre, you know that other people have done it, and other people have done it. And in order to do that, in order to talk about the apocalypse, in order to talk about time travel, in order to do this, in order to do that, you need to go big. And in some ways, you know, there's a kind of dare in that film that's so joyous. To make a film which tells you right off the bat, I'm about scope, I'm about this huge series of concern and subject, and being able to do it with those small gestures. I mean, it's like magic. It's like dreaming. I mean, it's like being with you. It's like, it's this kind of it's this kind of storytelling where the world is really, it's really created. It's not about, in some ways it's not about telling you, oh, I have the means to make you, to construct in front of you a world that is going to tell you that I have the means. But I don't have the means, but I can, construct. I can charm you with it. There is a genre of filmmaking, okay, which is very difficult to define, as its letters of nobility, certainly among filmmakers, has always in some ways been elusive to the public, because it's not something that you can immediately and squarely market. And it's elusive to filmmakers themselves, because it's a genre where the desire of all filmmakers, always shackled by the idea of their commercial obligation, is effectively expressed, because what's at the core of the essay film is the absolute freedom of the creator. And Chris, on that level, is the very expression of that. And, why are there not that many essay filmmakers? Very obviously because it's the most difficult. It's the most difficult intellectually. At one point, it's difficult because of the cumbersomeness of the medium, of the process, and also because it requires a kind of speed. Editors are good essay filmmakers. It's the essay film. It's what? It's that which exists in between the speed of the moment where you've captured an image or seen one, and the moment you meditate on it. Okay, and that's that moment, and it's constructing that thing that exists at the editing. It's rifing through all the possibilities of an image or a sequence, and it's organizing it. It's telling you what it is to think about images and sound. He emerged from the war, and he participated in the war. The echo of the war on him, the people, and the people who follow him, is just enormous. Not only the echo of the war, but the echo of the war, both as past, and also as what conditions the moment where everybody emerges as a filmmaker, which is the war and the Cold War, the war and its rebound. And in the Cold War, both the idea of the shock, the possibility of inherited utopias that have turned into nightmares, which is the story of communism as at first as generosity and then as slaughter, and so and also the idea of the possible annihilation, of the possible destruction of the planet, because the nuclear clock is ticking. In a sense, the beginning of La Jetee is really, to me, is the expression of that, because it's not a specific war. it's imageries of all the wars, all the annihilation, mounted, edited in this kind of compendium. It's war with a big W. You know, it's the idea of it's when you look at it, it's sumptuous. I mean, it's like the ruins, you know, with a big R. A film done of stills ultimately at one point contains one moment, 1 second of true motion. And, you know, everybody speaks about the cleverness of that, but, you know, what is this cleverness about? You know, what is it really doing? And what it's really doing is that it suddenly gives you back to a moment of emotion which happens to bear on a woman that you love, awakening, and that kind of miracle. I mean, it's like the train entering in the railroad of La Ciotat. I mean, it's like it's this kind of extraordinary, strange homage to Lumière, you know, because Lumière, it's not only the train, it's not only the workers coming out of his factory, it's also baby's breakfast. I mean, it's this kind of stuff that's so great about cinema, which is not only it can film the world, but it also can film what's the most intimate and what's the most familiar and what's the most simple in that sense. So that La Jetée is, yes, it is the war, it is science fiction, it is time travel, but it's all that because ultimately at the end you rediscover cinema at the most basic emotional term. That's what this film is so great. The miracle of a film like La Jetée is that, you know, at the end you have 2 seconds of action which absolutely encapsulate the very idea of cinema and the very idea of love. And nobody, I mean, everybody looks like a clod. I mean, this is one of those moments where you say, my God, he was so lucky. Something spoke through him, he did exactly the right gesture. I'm sure he had thought it, you know, but he would, you know, it's a miracle moment. It's a miracle moment because it's a film that talks about a miracle by showing and acting a miracle in front of your eyes. The photo roman, you know, it's like the photonovella. I mean, I mean, it was very much in vogue. A lot of it had to do with romance stories and love. They're straight stills, framed in very effective architectural way. I mean, creating a kind of comic strip, but having the advantage of the quote-unquote realism of photography. You bought them for not even $1. They were published, they had this kind of grainy, cheap quality, and, you know, but the trick of La Jetée is to take that format and to put it into a very different category. It's going back to that thing that was always in cinema, which is, you know, this endorsement of what's the most popular, consumable, and looking at the aesthetic and the inventiveness of this kind of immediate, cheap form, which are of mass circulation. So it's a kind of I mean, it's like, in a way, it's like, you know, feuillade, or it's that aspect of cinema which gets you close to the most popular form. And the trick of it is that you're going to have a film made of stills. So i.e. you're going to find yourself apparently for quite a long time in the film, you're going to find yourself in contravention with what normally would expect from one film, which is motion. But at the same time, by the magic and the art of angles, distances, framing, etc., the thing is going to move. And not only move in front of your eyes, but it's also helped by this commentary that makes you tells you in 5 seconds that, you're in this post-apocalyptic. He has a mission, and this mission is to save humanity as he has been able to survive, because without him, etc. But the intriguing thing is that in some ways all this kind of conceit is kind of offset by some curious elements. The beginning, it's the evocation of not a war, but all the wars possible. And then you have this idea that it's a man who is obsessed by an image that he's seen. He doesn't know exactly why and how. And that image, when you see it, is fairly decipherable, at least for the public that saw the film at that moment. It's the kind of modernist architecture of the airport in Paris that had just been constructed, and where I remember, like a lot of kids, your parents took you to see planes take off and land. It was great. You went there on a Sunday and you saw that. So it's a film that talks to you about a place in your childhood that's kind of immediately accessible. Chris is a philosopher. Chris is, like Godard, like a certain number of those guys of the 60s, people, and not only them as filmmakers, but some critics then and after that, these are people who tell you that cinema is thought. It's not only entertainment. They don't deny that it is. They're not at all guys who said it shouldn't entertain you. That's, came later. But there are guys who really think that cinema is a form of thought, and they keep insisting on that with the childlike wonder that they can display. So Chris has, decided, he feels compelled, is prone to explaining that, and now comes a great philosophical discourse about the nature of time as we live it. And I don't think it has anything to do with memory necessarily, or memory as, as if one has, one has. No, Chris is more, we are memory. We are we're time travelers. We're time travelers not simply because we're time travelers because we're all invested of saving civilization. We're time travelers from ourselves to ourselves. That is what we are. We're time travelers. We re-engineer, we function, we go back, we put together, etc. And all that for what? Because in fact, at one point, and that's what La Jetee is, forget, beyond the story of the war, beyond the story of the time traveler, etc. It's about this moment where you look at somebody you love. He's dealing in the most basic existential experience that you can dream of. Sometimes I'm talking with him, and I get the sense that he would extend he would apply the stamp of science fiction to things that anyone else but him would qualify differently. You can't pull off a film like La Jetée if you don't have a profound sympathy, I mean, you know, in the old Greek sense of the word, for the material described. This is not a postmodernist having a kind of distant strategy with it and using it in a kind of cagey way, and there's no irony, there's no quote-unquote in it. It's so completely outside of a lot of the maneuvers that, you know, modern filmmakers are doing. It just believes in it. It's a kind of non-psychological genre, or at least it's a different type of psychology that is at work. Chris is not necessarily a guy who is really interested in the grand neurotic tradition of 19th century literature. He goes into something else, and I think the clarity of science fiction allows him to develop his discourse, to talk about. I think he's really interesting in how things are done. You know, how do you put together a thought, a life? I mean, what is it to interact with the elements that are given to you? I mean, that's the great thing about it. Chris hijacks, okay? He's a hijacker. He takes you in, you think the boat is going this way straight to China. Well, something is going to happen, and Chris is going to hijack the boat, and you're going to find yourself into a territory. I mean, it's all over the film. It's like, you know, what he likes in the Miyazaki stuff, it's the moment where the train suddenly gets off its rail and becomes a plane. You know, and I think there's a part of Chris which is about this kind of not subversion. I mean, it's the way in which he mutates things into something else. So every element presented is like a switcher. It can take you this way, or it can take you that way. It can talk about something else than it's obviously talking about. And in the case of La Jetée, that's what he is. He's building a big hijacking machine, and it hijacks what's in the Gestalt at the time, which is the fear of annihilation, nuclear annihilation, which is the fearful echoes of the war, and it does it with the literature of the time, which was in part, I mean, all the relationship that science fiction had with that time. It's like Monsieur Lumière being revisited by Flash Gordon, and that's extraordinary.